Hey guys, my name's Nick, this is Walter, and welcome back to the shop. In this video, we're going to make this nightstand bookshelf thing, and before we get into it, I just want to talk about one other thing real quick. So next to the new one that we're building, this is actually one of the first pieces of furniture that I ever tried to build. It's a nightstand, and I built it originally just to fit the small space in my studio apartment that I needed it at the time. But now that, I live in my own house and everything, I brought it with me and it works well. I just wanted another one to actually fit a certain spot. My house was built in 1924, so it's got some of those like old tall windows. And I didn't want to put a nightstand right in front of all that natural light coming through. So I made the new one a little bit shorter so that you can still see out the window just fine. And it'll give me a place to store more books. So with that, let's get into it. So I've got the original that we're going to base this new nightstand off of, and I just wanted to talk about it a little bit for a second. First off, the material that it's made out of project boards from, I think you can get them at any of the big box store home centers. And the nice thing about them is with the project boards, they're already a consistent 3/4 inches or as consistent as we need. So you don't need a planer or a jointer to get the boards to the right dimensions. And also they're glued into panels so you can kind of just take and rip off the pieces that you need, and otherwise you've got a full panel to use for the sides or the carcass or anything. And speaking of carcass construction, that's really what this is with the face frame on it. And the nice thing about that is we can kind of use any type of joinery on it, and the face frame hides anything behind it. So if we were to cut dados into it and align the shelves that way, the face frame would cover it. Or with this one, for example, there's actually pocket holes underneath the top shelf and the bottom shelf, but because of the face frames and the fact that it sits on the ground, you can't really see that at all. So with that in mind, let's get into a cutting montage that you can't really follow, but we'll make sure to show you the dimensions afterwards. You might notice some of the tools rearranged if you've seen some of my other videos. I think that we're going to be doing some more organization projects coming up because I can't make up my mind on what I want to do. And now I'm marking the top supports off of the shelf that I had already cut. This is going to try and make everything as square as possible. So I took them over to the miter gauge on my table saw and just cutting them to the correct width. Now I'm laying out the marks for the pocket holes. I've drilled into the opposite side of a wood one too many times to not do this anymore. And everyone knows third time's the charm when it comes to putting a bit into a drill. This is as good of time as any to let you know that I'll be making plans available for this. When they're available, I'll put them down in the description below. It's a pretty easy project, but I know that having the dimensions and the order of operations sometimes is pretty helpful. And with all those holes drilled, I'm going to mark out on the sides where that shelf is going to sit so I have a reference point. Then I'm going to glue it and use these corner buddy clamps to hold it in place while I put in some brad nails. I'll leave a link in the description to these corner buddy clamps along with all the other tools I use too. And I'm doing this because when you use pocket screws, they tend to want to move the piece a little bit. And as it would be kind of tough to clamp this to keep it all in one place, brad nails make it a little bit easier. So this is just a temporary measure until I get the screws in. I find it a lot easier to clean some of the squeeze out before it hardens at all. However, I should have waited another minute or two because after I put the pocket hole screws in, it just caused more squeeze out and I had to do it all over again. So with that shelf in, it's secure, but the top is still wobbly. That's one of the reasons that we're putting these top pieces in. That'll take a lot of that flex out. And it's 10 times easier to have this clamp already set up as opposed to trying to hold the piece in place and get the clamp set up at the same time. Don't ask me how I know. I'm just lining the corners of this long piece up with the top corner of the carcass that you're seeing there. Nothing too fancy, it's not going to be seen, but we do want to make sure it's secure. And then we're going to do the same thing on the back too. These pieces are dual purpose. A, they hold the top of the carcass from flexing in and out, and B, we're eventually going to screw through these or drill through these and then screw into the tabletop from underneath. So this will be how we secure the top onto the piece as well. You can see how much sturdier that made it. I intentionally didn't cut any of the face frame pieces to the final dimensions at the beginning, and that's because I wanted to measure right off the piece. I think that's going to give us a better fit at the end. But just like those top support pieces, I'm just cross-cutting them at the table saw and sneaking up on the lines that I drew. I'm going to glue and then brad nail each piece down, and you can see a little mark there where I've drawn the center point for each of the pieces, and that's how I'm lining it up. In retrospect, I probably would assemble all of the face frame with pocket hole screws and then assemble it as one if I did it again. That's the way that I've put face frames on before, and it works pretty well. The other thing is, because I actually cut these pieces from two different boards, there was about a 1/16 of a difference between the stiles and the rails on here. I must have just been watching Wood by Wright earlier as I tried to do this with a hand plane. But then once I realized that that was taking too long, I got the belt sander out and it went a little bit more quickly. I've used wood putty in the past to fill brad nails, but I wanted to try the glue and sawdust method. So that's what you're seeing here. And in all honesty, I think that I like the wood filler better. I'm not sure that this looked any better or there was any real advantage. And then while that was drying, I'm just putting a quick, I think, 1/4 or 3/16 round over on the front and sides of what's going to be the tabletop. And then I'll start sanding that down. Unfortunately, after this was the last time that I had a charged battery for my random orbital sander, and because I was too impatient, I ended up doing all the sanding for this project by hand. It really wasn't too bad with these pine project boards, they sand pretty easily, but I'm pretty sure sanding is my least favorite part about woodworking. I cut a scrap piece of 1/4-inch plywood to use as the backing. Knowing that I'm not going to stain any part of this, I'm just going to use a wipe-on polyurethane. I wasn't worried about the color or anything. I just needed something to not be able to, see through it. So put this on, tacked it in with brad nails, and called it good enough. As mentioned earlier, I'm drilling through these support pieces and then the screws are going to come up from underneath. I'm drilling these a little bit oversized and using pan head screws, so as this wood expands and contracts a little bit, it's got some wiggle room to do so. I had already sanded it, so I jumped right into mineral spirits to take the dust off. And then after waiting the recommended amount of time, I put some wipe-on poly on. And again, waiting for what the bottle said, sanding with 220, and then applying a second coat. I'm really happy with how this build turned out, and I wanted to thank you for watching. I'd welcome you to like and subscribe if you are enjoying the video, and let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see. With that, have fun building.